In the distant reaches of the galaxy, the Xylon race stood as one of the most advanced civilizations ever known. With technology and knowledge far beyond that of any other species, they had conquered planets, mastered genetics, and perfected science in ways no one had ever dreamed possible. The Xylon saw themselves as the pinnacle of life, believing that no other species could match their brilliance. They looked down on those they considered lesser species, particularly the humans of Earth. Dr. Xylara was a brilliant genetic engineer from the Xylon Empire, renowned for her groundbreaking work in altering genetic codes to enhance the abilities of various species. Her reputation was unmatched, and many believed that she could shape any organism into something stronger, faster, and smarter. She was cold, calculated, and detached, a scientist who valued results over emotions. When Xylara was assigned to Earth, she was skeptical. She had heard much about humanity, how they had reached the stars but still clung to old traditions and primitive instincts. To her, humans were raw and untapped, their potential unpolished and chaotic. She was tasked with a simple job: study the human genome, perform experiments, and report her findings to the Xylon High Council. The humans were an oddity. Their biology seemed inefficient compared to the advanced races of the galaxy. They had physical limitations that other species had long overcome, and their social structures were primitive compared to the Xylon. To Xylara, this assignment seemed almost beneath her, but she took it with professional detachment. Her assignment took her to Earth's military base on the outskirts of a quiet human colony. Here she would study human soldiers who volunteered for genetic enhancement experiments. The first subject of her experiment was Captain Rowan Carter, a young but highly decorated soldier with a reputation for resilience in the face of adversity. Rowan had heard of the Xylon before. He had trained under the belief that humanity was destined to become a powerful force in the universe. He was proud of his species despite their imperfections. He knew that the Xylon looked at humans as inferior, but he had always believed that one day humanity would prove them wrong. Now he was part of an experiment to change the odds and potentially prove to the galaxy that humans had something special. When Rowan first met Xylara, he could see the coldness in her eyes. Her gaze was sharp and her posture rigid. She didn't see him as a person but as a subject, an object for her scientific scrutiny. She greeted him with a formal nod, her words clipped and businesslike. "Captain Carter," she said in a voice that was both calm and distant, "I am here to study the human genome. You have volunteered for genetic enhancement. Do not be concerned. This will be painless and your service to humanity will be invaluable." Rowan gave a slight smile. "I'm not here for glory, Doctor. I'm here because I believe in humanity's potential. I believe that we're capable of more than what we've been given." Xylara raised an eyebrow. She had heard humans speak like this before, so full of confidence and pride, yet utterly naive. She was sure that after her enhancements, this human would be a stronger, more efficient version of himself. But she still believed that even with all his potential, a human could never match the superiority of the Xylon. The tests began the next day. Xylara had Rowan undergo a series of physical and mental evaluations. She noted every detail: his muscle density, his endurance levels, his reaction times. As she conducted her experiments, she was fascinated by the resilience of the human body. Though it wasn't as efficient as the Xylons, there was something about Rowan's form that intrigued her. His body responded to the treatments and his mind absorbed the information quickly. As Xylara continued her research, she began altering Rowan's genetic code. She injected him with various serums designed to enhance his strength, endurance, and cognitive abilities. The first few days were challenging for Rowan. His body ached from the modifications and his mind was overwhelmed by the new stimuli. But Rowan pushed through, refusing to show any weakness. The pride in his eyes never faded, no matter how difficult the experiments became. Xylara, on the other hand, remained emotionless as she monitored Rowan's progress. She had seen it all before with other species: genetic enhancements that pushed their bodies to their limits. But with Rowan, there was something different. As she watched his body adapt to the changes, she couldn't help but notice the drive in his eyes, the unyielding determination that seemed to pulse from his very being. One evening, after a particularly grueling physical test, Rowan collapsed onto a cot in the laboratory. His muscles were sore and his mind felt foggy, but there was a fire in his heart that refused to die. He looked up at Zylara, who stood at the far end of the room reviewing data on a monitor. She glanced at him without speaking, but Rowan could see something in her expression, something like curiosity, but also a faint hint of admiration. "Is it always this hard?" he asked, his voice strained but determined. Zylara paused for a moment before answering. "Pain is part of the process. Without it, there can be no improvement." Rowan smirked. "I suppose you're right. But I'm not doing this for improvement. I'm doing this because I believe in something bigger than myself. Something bigger than this experiment." Zylara's gaze softened, though she quickly masked it with her usual detachment. "Perhaps you will learn something from this experiment after all. Or perhaps you will just learn the limits of your human form." Rowan's smile widened. "We'll see about that." Days turned into weeks, and as Rowan's genetic enhancements began to take effect, Zylara's perception of him began to shift. She could see the changes in his body. His muscles were more defined, his endurance had improved, and his reflexes had become faster than any human she had ever studied. Yet there was something else she couldn't quite place. It wasn't just his physical transformation that impressed her. It was his attitude, his will to keep going, even when every part of him screamed to stop. Every time Rowan faced a challenge, whether physical or mental, he pushed himself further. There was no quit in him, and as much as Zylara tried to remind herself that she was just observing, that this was simply an experiment, she couldn't deny that a part of her was drawn to him. Late one night, as Zylara reviewed her notes in the lab, Rowan approached her. He wasn't wearing his usual uniform, but instead he was dressed casually, as though he had just finished his routine. He looked better than ever, his enhancements fully taking effect. "You're still awake," he said, his voice a little quieter than usual. Zylara glanced up at him, her expression unreadable. "I have work to do." Rowan nodded, but there was a glint in his eyes, something she couldn't quite understand. "You know, you're not as bad as I thought." Zylara raised an eyebrow. "You thought I was bad?" "At first, yes," Rowan said with a grin. "But now I think you're just misunderstood." Zylara found herself speechless. She had never expected a human to speak to her like this, so casually, so confidently. It was an odd feeling. She cleared her throat and turned back to her work. "Don't waste your energy on such thoughts." "Captain," she said, her voice firm. But even as she said it, Zylara realized she wasn't being entirely honest with herself. Maybe, just maybe, she had begun to see humanity in a new light, through the eyes of this one man, Captain Rowan Carter. Days turned into weeks, and the once cold and clinical atmosphere in the research facility began to shift. Dr. Zylara, always the detached scientist, found herself observing Captain Rowan Carter with more than just a professional interest. She had begun to see him less as a specimen for study, and more as an individual with a strange kind of strength that intrigued her. Zylara had always prided herself on being immune to distractions. She had seen countless species, modified thousands of genetic codes, and experienced things many of her fellow Xylon scientists could only dream of. But something about this human Rowan was different. His resilience was impressive, but it wasn't just his physical strength that stood out. It was the way he faced every obstacle with determination and pride, as though he was ready to overcome anything the universe threw at him. At first, she had believed that humanity's genetic potential was limited, that they were no match for the might of the Xylon, or even some of the lesser races. But after weeks of testing, she was beginning to wonder if she had underestimated them. "How are you feeling today, Captain?" Zylara asked one morning as Rowan prepared for another round of genetic alterations. Her voice was clinical, but there was a soft edge to it, one that she quickly masked. Rowan was lying on the examination table, his body covered in a thin sheet, ready for the next phase of experimentation. He stretched his arms and looked at her with a grin, a smile that always seemed to disarm her despite her best efforts to remain impartial. "I'm feeling good, stronger than ever," he replied confidently, his tone matching the optimism in his eyes. Zylara nodded, tapping her fingers on the edge of the console. She had been adjusting the serum doses, experimenting with his DNA to push his body beyond what it had been capable of before. It was part of the plan, to create the perfect soldier, a human who could match the strength of the galaxy's most powerful species. But as she administered the latest round of injections, she couldn't help but notice something strange. Rowan's vital signs were stabilizing quickly, but his heart rate was steady. There was no strain, no sign of the usual stress that accompanied such intense modifications. His body wasn't just accepting the changes, it was thriving. Scilara leaned over to examine the data more closely, her brow furrowing as she reviewed the results. This wasn't what she had expected. "You're doing well, Captain," Scilara said, more to herself than to him, "but I wasn't expecting such a fast recovery. The modifications usually take more time to show results." Rowan chuckled softly, clearly proud of himself. "Well, I told you humans were tough." Scilara couldn't help but smile, though she quickly wiped it away. "Toughness doesn't explain this," she murmured. Over the next few days, the changes in Rowan became even more evident. His endurance had skyrocketed, and his reflexes were faster than any soldier Scilara had observed, even among the most advanced alien races. But it wasn't just physical. His mental clarity had improved as well. His focus was sharper, his decision-making quicker, and he seemed to be processing information faster than she thought possible for a human. The more she observed, the more confused Scilara became. She had designed the experiment with specific goals in mind, to enhance Rowan's physical abilities, to create a superior version of him. But as she saw the results, she began to wonder if she was witnessing something far more profound than she had anticipated. One evening, as Scilara reviewed Rowan's test results, she noticed something that made her pause. She had asked him to complete a series of mental tasks, puzzles, strategy games, and simulations designed to push his brain to the limits. Normally, humans struggled with these kinds of tasks, but Rowan had completed every one in record time. But it wasn't just the speed that caught Sciara's attention. It was his creativity. Rowan had approached each task with an innovative solution, something that no one had expected. His thinking was unpredictable, his strategies unorthodox. It was as if his mind was stretching beyond the confines of what Scilara had thought possible for a human. Scilara leaned back in her chair, staring at the screen in front of her. For the first time in her life, she found herself questioning her assumptions. She had always believed that humans were limited in their potential, that they would never be able to match the advanced races in intelligence or physical prowess. But Rowan was proving her wrong. She could not deny the results, and for the first time she was unsure of her conclusions. "Is it possible?" she whispered to herself. Meanwhile, Rowan noticed the shift in her behavior. She had always been a scientist focused on data, her emotions locked away behind a wall of logic. But lately, her expressions were softer, her words more reflective. She seemed distracted, as though she was caught in her own thoughts. One evening, as Rowan finished another training session, he approached Scilara, noticing the deep frown on her face as she stared at the data on her screen. "Something bothering you, Doc?" he asked, his voice a little softer than usual. Scilara didn't look up immediately, but she didn't brush him off as she normally would. Instead, she took a moment, collecting her thoughts before responding. "I've been analyzing the results of your enhancements, Captain," she began. "Your physical abilities are beyond what I expected, but it's your mental adaptability that's truly remarkable." Rowan raised an eyebrow, surprised. "So I'm not just a lab rat anymore?" Sciara's lips twitched at the corner, a faint smile tugging at them, but she quickly erased it. "I never saw you as a rat. I'm simply saying that your potential is far greater than I initially thought. Your creativity, your resilience, your ability to learn and adapt, it's not what I would expect from a human." Rowan watched her carefully. "Well, I told you from the start, humans are capable of more than people think." Scilara nodded slowly, her gaze drifting back to the data on her screen. "Perhaps I've underestimated you," she said softly, more to herself than to him. Rowan stepped closer, his tone light but with a hint of sincerity. "I think that's the problem with people like you. You look at us humans like we're just a project, a puzzle to be solved. You don't see us for what we are, the way we think, the way we fight. Maybe that's why you're so surprised." Scilara turned her gaze toward him, her expression unreadable. She opened her mouth to respond but stopped herself. What was there to say? He was right. She had treated him like just another subject, a specimen to be molded into something greater, but he was more than that. The silence between them hung in the air for a long moment, and for the first time Scilara felt uncertain. She was a scientist, a woman of logic, but now she was confronting something that logic could not explain. Was it just the experiment, or was it something more? Was Rowan's humanity the key to something deeper? As Rowan prepared to leave the lab for the evening, he looked back at her one last time, a glint of understanding in his eyes. "You know, Doc, you're not so bad. I think you're starting to get it." Xylara didn't respond immediately. She just watched him leave, the weight of his words lingering in her mind. Cliffhanger. As she sat alone in the quiet lab, surrounded by the data she had so meticulously collected, Xylara felt something shift within her. Could the human spirit be the missing piece in her research? And could Rowan Carter of all people be the key to unlocking a truth she never thought possible? As the days passed, the tension between Dr. Xylara and Captain Rowan Carter grew stronger, though neither of them acknowledged it directly. Their interactions, once strictly professional, had begun to change in subtle ways. Xylara found herself lingering over Rowan's progress more than she had intended, staring at his test results with a growing sense of admiration she couldn't quite shake. She, the scientist who had once believed herself above emotions, now found herself contemplating Rowan's humanity in a way that was impossible to ignore. Rowan, too, had noticed the change. At first, he had seen Xylara as just a scientist, cold and detached, focused solely on her work. But now there were moments when he caught a glimpse of something more in her eyes, something softer, something uncertain. She was still distant, but it was clear that she was no longer the same person who had started this experiment. Her confidence, once unshakable, now seemed to waver at times when she watched him work, or when their conversations turned to something deeper than just science. Xylara was no fool. She knew that Rowan's enhancements had gone beyond the limits she had expected. His physical strength had increased dramatically, and his mind was sharper than any human she had encountered before. But what really fascinated her wasn't the numbers or the results. It was how Rowan carried himself, how he faced every challenge with an unyielding will and an almost reckless determination. It was the way his humanity, the very thing she had once seen as a flaw, became his greatest strength. On the day that everything changed, Xylara had called Rowan in for another round of testing. She had prepared a series of simulations, designed to push him to the brink of exhaustion. She was still determined to see how far his human body could be pushed before it broke down. After all, no matter how strong or intelligent he had become, he was still human. He was still limited in ways that no alien species, especially the Xylon, could ever be. "Captain Carter," she said, her voice steady, but betraying a hint of hesitation. "Today's tests will be more difficult than before. Are you ready?" Rowan nodded without hesitation, his eyes locked on hers. "I've been ready since the day I signed up for this." Xylara's lips curled slightly, but she said nothing more. She led him to the simulation room, a sterile chamber filled with advanced equipment designed to test the limits of any species. As Rowan strapped himself into the harness and prepared for the trial, Xylara couldn't help but feel a strange knot form in her chest. She had been through this process countless times with other subjects, but there was something about Rowan that made it different. She tried to dismiss the thought, but it lingered. The test began, and Rowan immediately threw himself into the simulation, his body reacting with precision and power. The simulation was designed to push him to his absolute limits, an intense high-speed obstacle course, filled with challenges meant to exhaust and confuse even the most capable soldiers. But Rowan moved through the obstacles with an ease that was almost unnatural. His movements were fluid, calculated, and despite the increasingly difficult tasks, he never faltered. Xylara observed him with fascination. The data on her screen was coming in at a rate faster than she had ever expected. But as the test wore on, something unexpected happened. Rowan slowed down, not because he was tired, but because he seemed to be thinking. In the midst of the test, he paused at an obstacle that had stumped many of the best soldiers in previous trials, a wall that required both physical strength and strategic thinking to overcome. Most subjects simply relied on their power to push through, but Rowan took a moment analyzing the structure, considering his options. Then, in a move that no one had ever tried before, he used the environment around him to his advantage. Instead of charging through the wall, he found a way to leverage the surroundings, using the angle of the floor and a nearby beam to climb over it with ease. Xylara blinked in surprise. She had not expected this level of innovation from a human. It was as if he had anticipated the obstacle, understood it on a deeper level, and adapted in a way that no one else had thought to. For the first time, Zilara felt a stir of genuine awe. When the simulation ended, Rowan stood tall, sweat dripping from his brow, his chest heaving with the effort. But there was no sign of exhaustion in his eyes. Instead, there was a look of satisfaction, as if he had proven something, not just to Zilara, but to himself. "You did well," Zilara said, her voice softer than before. She quickly tried to return to her usual clinical tone. "But your results were unexpected," Rowan smiled, wiping his face with a towel. "Unexpected? You seem surprised, Doc. I thought you were all about results." Zilara frowned, staring at the screen again, trying to process what she had just seen. "I am, but I didn't expect you to adapt in such an unconventional way. Most of the species I've studied rely on brute force or instinct, but you—" Rowan cut her off, his voice serious. "That's the thing about humans. We don't just rely on what we're given. We find a way to make it work no matter what. It's not about the power or the speed. It's about outthinking the problem. And sometimes that's the only advantage we have." Zilara stared at him, her mind racing. She had always thought of humans as a species with limited capabilities, clinging to old, primitive ways. But here was Rowan, one human proving that creativity, adaptability, and resilience could make all the difference. He was right. The way humans approached problems was fundamentally different from any other species she had studied. It wasn't just about raw power or intellect. It was the combination of both and the ability to push beyond what was expected. Zilara couldn't help but wonder, was this what made humanity so unique? Was this the secret to their strength? As she stood there, lost in thought, Rowan spoke again. "You know, Doc, you've been watching me this whole time, but I think you've missed the point." Zilara looked up at him, confused. "What do you mean?" Rowan grinned, taking a step closer. "You've been focused on making me stronger, faster, smarter. But you've never really asked why I keep pushing. You've never asked what drives me to go beyond what you think I'm capable of. That's what you've been missing all along." For a moment, Zilara was silent. She had never considered that before. She had been so focused on the physical and mental alterations, so wrapped up in the science of it all, that she hadn't thought about the human spirit, the fire that burned inside every individual, propelling them forward even when the odds were stacked against them. "I'm not just a machine to be fixed, Doc," Rowan continued, his tone soft but firm. "I'm a person. I have something inside me that you can't replicate or enhance with a serum. That's what makes me human, and that's what makes us different from all the other species you've studied." Zilara felt a knot form in her chest. It was the first time she had ever really listened to what Rowan was saying. The first time she truly understood the depth of his words. She had spent so long analyzing the data, focusing on the numbers, that she had forgotten the most important factor, the human heart. For the first time, Zilara realized that it wasn't enough to simply enhance Rowan's body or mind. To truly understand what made him and humanity special, she needed to see the bigger picture. It wasn't just about the science. It was about the spirit, the drive, the unwavering belief that no matter how many times they were knocked down, they would always rise again. Cliffhanger. As Zilara watched Rowan walk away from the training room, her heart raced. She had always believed that science could explain everything, that logic could solve any problem. But Rowan had just shown her something she couldn't quantify, something that went beyond the realm of science. And as she stood there staring at the door he had just walked through, she realized that she was no longer just studying him. She was beginning to understand him, and in doing so she was starting to question everything she had once known about humanity. The war had begun. Across the galaxy, news of the Xylon's expansion had spread, and humanity was once again under threat. The Xylon Empire, a powerful and advanced race, had begun to set its sights on Earth, planning an invasion that would surely overwhelm the human race. Zilara had always known that humanity was at a disadvantage. With their primitive technology and relatively short lifespan, humans were no match for the might of the Xylon. Or so she had believed until now. For weeks, she had worked tirelessly alongside Captain Rowan Carter, continuing his genetic enhancements and observing his progress. Yet there was something different now. The experiment had shifted from a cold scientific inquiry into something far more personal. Zilara no longer saw Rowan as just a subject. She had come to understand the essence of what made him and humanity strong. It wasn't just about physical power or intelligence. It was the resilience of the human spirit, the heart that refused to break even in the face of certain defeat. As the Xylon fleet neared Earth's orbit, the stakes grew higher. Rowan's enhancements had reached their peak. His body had been strengthened beyond human limits, his mind sharpened to a level that rivaled even the most advanced species. But it wasn't enough. The Xylon were too powerful. Rowan knew that his enhancements alone wouldn't win the war. But there was something else, something deeper, that he had learned from Xylara's experiments. The true strength of humanity lay not in physical might or advanced technology, but in unity, in the will to fight for something greater than oneself. Ilara, too, had changed. Over the course of her time on Earth, she had come to see humanity in a new light. She had witnessed Rowan's incredible resilience, his willingness to sacrifice for his people, and his unwavering determination to protect Earth. But more than that, she had begun to feel something inside her, a shift in her perspective. She had once viewed the Xylon as the pinnacle of evolution, but now she wasn't so sure. Could it be that the very qualities she had dismissed as weakness, human emotions, bonds, and spirit, were actually the greatest strength of all? The day of the invasion arrived. Xylara stood on the command deck of Earth's defense station, her eyes fixed on the massive Xylon fleet in the distance. The Earth Defense Forces were preparing for the worst, their weapons ready, their strategies in place. But even with all the preparation, Xylara knew that Earth's forces were no match for the power of the Xylon. It would take something more, something beyond technology and weapons, to win this battle. Captain Rowan Carter was ready. He had been training for this moment for months, pushing his limits in every way imaginable. His body was a weapon, his mind a finely tuned instrument, but as he stood in the command center, looking at the holographic display of the incoming fleet, he knew that the outcome of this war depended on more than just his abilities. It depended on the people of Earth working together, fighting with everything they had, just as he had fought alongside them. "I know we're outmatched," Rowan said, his voice calm but resolute, "but we're not out of options. We've got one chance to make this work. It's time to put everything we've got into this fight." Xylara, who had been observing from the corner, stepped forward. She had come to see Rowan not just as a subject but as a leader, a symbol of the human will to survive. She had witnessed the power of human unity, and she knew that it was something the Xylon couldn't comprehend. As advanced as they were, the Xylon had never known what it meant to fight for something as personal as survival. "We may not have the advanced technology or the sheer strength that the Xylon possess," Xylara said, her voice steady, "but we have something they don't. We have the will to fight for our future. We have the heart of humanity." Rowan looked at her, his eyes filled with a new understanding. "And that's what will win this war," he said. "It's not the technology. It's not the weapons. It's us together." The plan was set in motion. Rowan, leading a team of elite soldiers, would launch a daring assault on the Xylon flagship. Their mission: to disable the flagship's control systems, creating an opening for the rest of Earth's forces to strike. But the operation was risky, too risky for most people to even consider. It would require not only the strength of humanity's soldiers, but also their determination and willingness to make the ultimate sacrifice. As Rowan and his team made their way toward the Xylon flagship, Xylara stayed behind, coordinating the defense efforts from Earth's command center. The fate of the planet rested on the success of the mission, and she knew that there was no turning back. Rowan's team infiltrated the flagship, using the same strategies they had perfected during training, thinking outside the box, adapting to the situation, and overcoming obstacles with creativity and teamwork. The Xylon, accustomed to overwhelming force, were caught off guard by the ingenuity of the human assault. Rowan's leadership and quick thinking helped the team make it to the control room, where they launched the final phase of the attack. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Xylara watched as the Xylon fleet began to falter. The virus Rowan's team had implanted into the flagship system was spreading quickly, causing chaos among the Xylon forces. The human defense fleet, previously outmatched, began to gain ground. The Xylon ships, crippled by the virus, were unable to coordinate their attacks, and Earth's forces struck with precision, knocking out key targets one by one. Xylara felt a surge of hope, but she knew that the battle wasn't won yet. The Xylon would regroup. They were powerful, but they were not invincible. The final moments of the battle were a blur. Rowan's team had successfully disabled the Xylon flagship, and with the control systems offline, the rest of the fleet was in disarray. The human forces pressed the advantage, launching one last coordinated strike that crippled the Xylon invasion. As the last Xylon ship was destroyed, Rowan's voice crackled over the comms. "We did it. We stopped them. Earth is safe." Xylara, her heart pounding, stood in awe. The battle had been won, but it wasn't just the technology, the weapons, or even Rowan's enhancements that had made the difference. It was humanity's strength, their creativity, their adaptability, their unbreakable spirit that had led them to victory. As she watched the final Xylon ship disappear into the distance, Xylara's thoughts turned inward. She had spent so much of her life studying and manipulating genetics, believing that science and logic held all the answers. But now she realized that there was something greater than any experiment, something more powerful than any enhancement. It was the heart of humanity, the ability to rise above adversity, to find hope in the darkest of times, and to fight for each other. Rowan, standing beside her, looked out at the stars. "We won, Doc. We proved that humans are more than just a footnote in the galaxy's story." Xylara turned to him, a soft smile on her face. "Yes, you did. And for the first time, Xylara truly understood. The Xylon may have had advanced technology, but humanity had something they could never replicate: heart. And that was what would carry them through whatever challenges lay ahead." Final twist. As the celebration began, a mysterious signal reached Earth's defense network, a transmission from a distant corner of the galaxy, warning that this victory might just be the beginning of a much larger conflict. Xylara's heart skipped a beat. Humanity had proved itself, but there were greater challenges ahead. And for the first time, she wasn't just a scientist studying humanity. She was a part of it.